I remember the first time I realized how much power confidence could hold. I was 12, sitting in a classroom where every voice seemed louder than mine, every opinion stronger, and every glance sharper. I had just moved to a new city, surrounded by people who had known each other forever, and there I was, a girl who didn't quite fit in, who felt like every word I said could be twisted or ignored. But one afternoon, something shifted. Our teacher asked a question about a book no one had read closely, and instinctively, I raised my hand. My heart pounded like a drum, my palms slick with sweat, and I knew my answer might sound foolish. I knew someone might laugh or scoff. And yet I spoke. I didn't overthink the words. I didn't apologize for my voice or soften my tone to blend in. I just said it, and the room fell quiet, not because my answer was perfect, but because it was delivered with conviction. That moment stayed with me for years. I realized then that confidence wasn't about knowing everything. It wasn't about being right every time or avoiding mistakes. It was about trusting your voice enough to speak, even when doubt hovered in the room like a shadow. Confidence is a force that draws attention not because it demands it, but because it refuses to hide. I've seen it countless times, in situations that seemed ordinary at first glance. At a networking event, surrounded by successful business people, I introduced myself and listed the languages I spoke. Some of them laughed at first, half in disbelief, half in amusement. But the confidence in my tone, the steady way I held my posture, the clarity in my eyes, it forced them to pause. Suddenly, curiosity replaced amusement. Doubt fell silent because confidence does not argue. It presents itself and lets the world react. That lesson has followed me into every corner of my life. Whether I'm negotiating a deal, presenting an idea, or simply asking for something I deserve, I've seen the way certainty in one's own voice can shift the energy of a room. People listen. People lean in. Even the loudest skeptic finds themselves quieted, not by proof, but by the unshakable assurance that the speaker possesses. I've also learned that confidence amplifies resilience. There have been moments when people have doubted me outright, dismissed my ideas, or questioned my abilities simply because of who I am, where I come from, or how young I appeared. In those moments, it would have been easy to shrink, to retreat into a corner and let the doubts of others define me. But instead, I reminded myself that my confidence is louder than their disbelief. Every time I held my ground, every time I refused to lower my voice or compromise my presence, I saw doubt fade in real time. I watched skeptical faces soften, hesitant nods emerge, and conversations pivot from skepticism to engagement. Confidence is not a mask. It is not pretending you are fearless. It is a declaration, subtle yet unyielding, that your presence, your knowledge, and your voice matter. Even in the world of languages, a field I know intimately, confidence makes a difference that skill alone cannot. I speak 9 languages, and each one carries its own rhythm, its own culture, its own identity. When I speak in a new language for the first time, the words might stumble at first. Grammar might wobble. Pronunciation might falter. And yet, if I deliver them with confidence, if I assert the words as mine and speak them without apology, people respond. They listen. They engage. They respect not just the words, but the speaker. The power of confidence is that it converts uncertainty into attention, hesitation into respect, and doubt into engagement. I've watched this happen hundreds of times. Confidence also has a contagious quality. When someone sees a person speak boldly, without hesitation, it inspires them. In meetings, people who are unsure of themselves often hold back their ideas, fearing judgment or ridicule. But when a confident voice rises, it sets a tone, giving others permission to step forward, to speak up, to be heard. In that way, confidence is not selfish, it is catalytic. It transforms spaces, opens doors, and shifts dynamics. The quiet ones in the room suddenly find courage. The doubtful ones start to listen. And it isn't just about public moments. Confidence speaks louder in private, too. When I make decisions about my own life, when I choose opportunities that others think are risky or impossible, my confidence carries me forward. It turns internal doubts into fuel rather than chains. It is a shield against the whispers of insecurity that often try to derail ambition. Every time I trust my instincts and my voice, I reinforce the truth that confidence speaks louder than any doubt, whether inside my head or coming from someone else. Language is more than words. I didn't realize it fully until I started traveling, meeting people in their homes, hearing the way they laughed, argued, and expressed even the simplest things. Every time I spoke in a new language, it felt like stepping into a different world, like unlocking a secret door that few people could open. I remember the first time I spoke French fluently in a cafe in Paris. I had practiced for months, repeating phrases until my tongue felt heavy and my accent seemed almost right. When I finally spoke to the barista, ordering coffee with the correct form, the way I phrased a small joke, the way I nodded and smiled naturally, it wasn't just understood, it was appreciated. The conversation shifted. I wasn't a tourist fumbling with words anymore. I was someone participating in the rhythm of the culture. The language carried me into their world, and suddenly I could see and feel life from their perspective. Words, it seemed, could open doors that money or status could never reach. Every language I've learned has given me access to a culture, a way of thinking, and a set of traditions that no translation could fully convey. In Spanish, I've learned to listen to the musicality of expression, how sentences twist with emotion before landing gracefully at the end. In Mandarin, I've experienced the discipline behind every tone and the layers of meaning and characters that are centuries old. Each time I speak in another person's language, I carry their history, their values, and their worldview. It's not imitation, it's immersion. And with that immersion comes power. There is an authority in being able to understand and engage in someone's culture through their own words, an authority that transcends appearances, age, or background. People notice when you speak their language correctly and respectfully. It signals that you value their world, that you have taken the time to enter it fully. Language also gives power in subtle ways. I've seen it in business meetings, negotiations, and casual conversations. When I can switch languages fluidly, I notice a shift in dynamics. A point that might have been dismissed in one language suddenly carries weight in another. People lean forward, nod, smile, and respond differently, often because the words themselves carry meaning that cannot be replicated through translation. There is a deep connection in hearing your own culture reflected accurately in someone else's voice. I've witnessed this countless times. A colleague or friend hearing their language spoken by someone who is clearly an outsider, yet fluent, their skepticism softening, their openness expanding. Language can disarm, connect, and even inspire admiration. I also carry culture through the nuances of expression. It's not just about grammar or vocabulary. In every language, there are idioms, metaphors, and ways of phrasing ideas that reveal values, history, and social norms. In Italian, a casual greeting can hold warmth and familiarity that English cannot replicate. In Arabic, certain phrases communicate respect and empathy in ways that feel almost tangible. Every time I speak in a new language, I carry those subtleties with me. I become a bridge, carrying ideas, emotions, and cultural understanding across borders. And with that bridge comes influence. The ability to connect with people authentically in their own language can create opportunities, build trust, and foster collaboration in ways that go far beyond mere words. Language also preserves identity, and when I speak it, I carry a responsibility. I remember teaching a child in a small village in West Africa who spoke a language I had only begun to learn. Every word I pronounced correctly, every story I retold accurately, created recognition, pride, and curiosity. Language carries culture, yes, but it also carries memory, history, and identity. To speak another person's language is to honor that history and to participate in it respectfully. And in honoring it, you gain influence and credibility. People respond to the effort, the precision, and the care you show when you enter their cultural space through language. It is an unspoken acknowledgement that you are not just an observer. You are present, engaged, and aware of the world beyond your own experience. Power through language is also visible in moments of storytelling. When I tell a story in another language, I notice subtle changes in how people react, how they laugh, how they absorb tension, and how they empathize with characters. Language shapes thought, and thought shapes perception. When I switch languages mid-story, I can emphasize humor differently, express sorrow more vividly, or highlight details that might be lost in translation. I am carrying culture, but I am also shaping experience. The words themselves carry rhythm, tone, and emotional weight that are culturally coded, and when I use them correctly, people respond not only to the story but to the way I am telling it. That is power. Even outside storytelling, language holds authority in perception. Speaking someone's language fluently signals intellect, adaptability, and respect. It shows that you have invested time, effort, and thought into something meaningful to them. It demonstrates mastery beyond the superficial. In professional settings, social interactions, or casual encounters, people instinctively listen more, treat you with more consideration, and assume competence. Language carries culture, and carrying culture carries influence. It becomes a tool not of domination, but of connection, persuasion, and presence. I learned early that underestimation is a quiet but powerful force. People tend to measure what they see against what they expect, and anything beyond that framework can be dismissed, doubted, or ignored. I experienced this countless times growing up, as a young black girl with big dreams and ambitions that seemed, to others, too loud or too unusual. When I first started speaking multiple languages, the reactions were almost predictable. People would smile politely, nod, or laugh in disbelief, often before I had even finished explaining myself. 9 languages. Really, they would say, their tone a mixture of curiosity and doubt. And I could feel it, the subtle mental barrier forming in their minds. They underestimated me because they didn't understand the journey behind the words, the discipline it took, the late nights, the frustration, and the countless mistakes I had made to arrive at that level of fluency. Underestimation is often rooted in assumptions about identity. People look at me and see a black girl, confident, outspoken, proud. Some assume I couldn't possibly have the education, the exposure, or the skill to accomplish what I claim. And then I speak a language they don't know, or answer a question in 3 different tongues, and I see the shift, the pause, the widened eyes, the momentary loss of certainty. That instant is telling. It is proof that the human mind struggles with what it cannot immediately categorize. Underestimation is rarely about malice. It is about a natural hesitation to accept realities that challenge expectations. But once you confront it, it becomes a tool rather than an obstacle. When people underestimate you, they lower their guard. Their defenses are down, their skepticism audible in their laughter or side glances. And that is when you have the opportunity to exceed every expectation, to rewrite their assumptions, to make your skill, your voice, and your presence undeniable. I remember an event where this happened clearly. I was in a room full of accomplished business people, people who had achieved measurable success, people whose wealth, status, and influence were visible and commanding. I introduced myself and casually mentioned the number of languages I spoke. A few of them laughed, half-heartedly, but unmistakably. They didn't know me. They didn't know my story. All they had was a glance, a stereotype, and a measure of doubt. And in that room, I realized that being underestimated is a kind of quiet advantage. While they were laughing and dismissing, I was observing, listening, and preparing. When I began to speak in one of the languages, weaving in cultural references, humor, and insight, the laughter stopped. Skepticism turned to surprise. Surprise turned to respect. What they had underestimated was not just my skill, but the depth of my preparation, the years of work, and the thought behind every word. Underestimation is not always visible. It can appear in microexpressions, a raised eyebrow, a polite nod, a subtle hesitation. It can appear in the way someone interrupts or talks over you, assuming they know better. It can appear in classrooms, meeting rooms, or casual conversations. People do it instinctively because it is easier to measure someone by appearance than by accomplishment. But every time I faced underestimation, I realized I had a choice. I could shrink, I could argue, I could plead to prove myself. Or I could let my actions, my words, and my knowledge do the talking. And consistently, I found that showing mastery, stepping forward confidently, and refusing to be defined by someone else's limited understanding was far more powerful than trying to convince them before they were ready. There is also a deeper lesson in being underestimated. It teaches resilience. When people doubt you, you learn to hold your ground. You learn to navigate spaces where skepticism is the default reaction. You learn to anticipate the silent questions in the room, the mental checks people perform before accepting that you are capable. And in doing so, you develop a clarity about your own abilities, a self-reliance that no approval can replace. The people who underestimate you cannot diminish the work you've done, the skill you've cultivated, or the pride you carry in your accomplishments. In fact, their underestimation often sharpens your focus, making your eventual demonstration of ability even more powerful and memorable. Underestimation is also a mirror. It reflects biases, insecurities, and gaps in understanding. When someone underestimates you, they reveal not your limitations, but their own assumptions. I've seen it happen with language, with education, with race, with age, and with gender. And I've learned that recognizing this gives you an advantage. It allows you to anticipate reactions, to respond strategically, and to communicate in ways that dismantle doubt gradually, not forcefully. By speaking with calm authority, by demonstrating knowledge without arrogance, and by letting skills show themselves naturally, underestimation can transform from a roadblock into a stage for impact. Even in social settings, underestimation carries weight. People who assume they know your abilities might exclude you, interrupt you, or fail to listen. But once you act, once you reveal the depth behind what they thought was simple, their perceptions shift. What they once dismissed becomes remarkable. They reconsider, they question, they engage. Being underestimated is, paradoxically, an invitation to rise, to surprise, and to leave a mark far stronger than if everyone had assumed from the start that you were capable. I have always believed that words hold doors, invisible thresholds that only those who know the right key can open. Money can get you access to buildings, tickets, even exclusive conversations, but it cannot always buy understanding. The first time I truly grasped this was during a business trip abroad. I was walking through a small market in a country where I barely knew anyone, and I overheard a vendor speaking in a language I had recently learned. I approached, greeted him in his language, and asked about the quality of the goods. His eyes lit up with recognition, and without a word about money or bargaining, he offered me the best piece of the day, invited me to sample other items, and even shared stories about his family and local traditions. I realized then that the language I spoke had created trust instantly. Money could never have achieved that. Money could not have conveyed respect for his culture, for his way of life. Only words could. Every new language I learned opened a similar door somewhere, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. In Germany, when I greeted someone in German rather than English, I saw the ease in their posture, the warmth in their smile. In Japan, even a simple attempt at politeness in Japanese opened conversations I would otherwise have never been part of. People leaned in. They shared more than information. They shared connection. Mastery of language gives access to spaces where status and wealth may exist, but genuine communication is missing. It allows you to reach people in ways that a bank account cannot replicate. Money can create a transaction. Language can create a relationship. And in life, relationships matter more than transactions. I have also noticed how language opens doors in ways that are unexpected. Once, I was at a conference filled with international participants. Everyone was speaking English, and I, too, joined in. But in the middle of a discussion, I switched to Portuguese, one of the languages I had mastered. There was a pause, a brief flicker of surprise, and then suddenly a group of participants began speaking to me directly in Portuguese. The conversation became more intimate, more nuanced. They shared insights, perspectives, and humor that would have been lost if we had only stuck to English. A door had opened, not because of credentials, not because of money, but because I spoke their language. That experience taught me that knowledge of language is a form of access to hidden worlds. worlds that exist parallel to the visible, transactional structures of society. Language also opens doors that are symbolic rather than literal. It conveys respect, cultural literacy, and effort. I've noticed this repeatedly in negotiations and networking situations. When I can greet someone in their language, when I can reference their culture accurately, I am no longer just another participant. I am someone who has invested time in understanding them, and that investment matters. People respond differently to someone who shows effort and mastery, especially in something as personal and revealing as language. Money can impress, but it rarely communicates that level of intentionality. Language does. It signals thoughtfulness, respect, and dedication in a way that wealth cannot. There are also doors that open simply in the realm of curiosity and imagination. I have traveled to small towns where locals initially viewed me as an outsider. Then, I began speaking in their dialect, incorporating their idioms, laughing at the same jokes, responding to their phrases with fluency. Doors that were once closed by suspicion or unfamiliarity suddenly swung open. Children approached me. Families invited me into their homes. Strangers shared secrets, traditions, and stories they had never shared with tourists or wealthy visitors. Money would have gotten me a hotel room, a meal, or a guide, but not access to the heart of the community. Language was the key, and mastery of it unlocked experiences that could never be bought. Mastering multiple languages also multiplies opportunity. Each new language expands your sphere of influence and the number of doors available to you. It allows you to negotiate, to collaborate, to lead, and to learn in environments where others cannot. I have found that doors I thought were permanently closed due to hierarchy, cultural barriers, or preconceived notions often open when I simply speak the language of the people involved. Fluency communicates competence, confidence, and respect. It signals that you are capable of navigating complexity, that you are adaptable, and that you can meet people on their terms rather than forcing them to meet yours. Beyond professional and social advantages, language also opens doors internally to understanding and empathy. The deeper you go into another language, the more you understand the worldview embedded in it. You gain access to ways of thinking, cultural values, and historical perspectives that are invisible to someone who only sees the world through their own language. That knowledge cannot be bought. It must be earned through study, practice, and immersion. And once earned, it gives power, not the kind of power measured in currency, but the kind that creates influence, connection, and opportunities for impact that money alone could never achieve. I have learned that pride is not arrogance. It is a quiet but unshakable understanding of who you are and where you come from. It is the foundation upon which respect is built, both from yourself and from others. Growing up as a Black girl, I often felt the weight of assumptions before I even opened my mouth. Assumptions about intelligence, ability, ambition, and belonging. People saw me and instantly categorized me, placing me into a box that fit their limited perception. And I realized early on that the only way to break through those assumptions was not by apologizing, shrinking, or softening my presence. It was by standing tall, speaking my truth, and embracing every part of my identity with pride. There is something magnetic about that. When you carry yourself with pride, people cannot dismiss you as easily. They notice. They hesitate. They pay attention. Pride in identity begins with self-recognition. You must know yourself fully, your heritage, your culture, your experiences, your strengths, and your vulnerabilities. When I speak 9 languages, for example, it is not just a list of skills. It is an acknowledgement of where I have been, the communities I have entered, and the effort it took to achieve mastery. It is a reflection of my curiosity and resilience. And I carry it with pride because it is part of who I am. That pride is palpable when I speak. People sense it even before they fully understand it. It is visible in posture, in tone, and in the assurance with which I move through spaces that might otherwise feel intimidating. Pride announces itself without words, and in doing so, it commands respect. I have seen it play out countless times. When I enter a room and assert my presence, I notice subtle shifts in energy. People who might have ignored me pause. People who might have underestimated me reconsider. It is not about demanding attention. It is about radiating self-assurance rooted in identity. Pride communicates to others that you are grounded, capable, and aware of your worth. It is a statement that cannot be refuted by doubt or ridicule because it is anchored in the truth of your existence. And once people recognize that truth, respect often follows naturally, even if silently. There is a particular power in speaking from identity in moments of challenge or skepticism. I recall a situation where someone questioned my abilities, smirking as if my background or youth limited what I could accomplish. I did not respond with defensiveness. I responded with clarity and pride in who I am. I spoke confidently about my skills, my experiences, and the work I had done to reach that point. I let my identity and achievements speak together without apology. The reaction was subtle at first, a pause, a reconsideration, a nod, but it was unmistakable. Pride, when rooted in truth, can be more persuasive than argument. It conveys legitimacy in ways that logic alone often cannot. Pride also allows you to navigate spaces where identity is questioned or undervalued. I have traveled, worked, and studied in places where my background was unfamiliar or even marginalized. In those spaces, I noticed that people often attempt to define you by what they know or think they know. They might underestimate, dismiss, or stereotype. But when I moved through those spaces with pride, embracing my culture, my language abilities, and my experiences, I noticed doors opening in ways I could not have predicted. People treated me differently, not because I demanded it, not because I conformed, but because pride carries authority. It signals that you belong, that you are worthy, and that your voice matters. Identity is not static, and neither is the pride that comes from it. It grows as you grow, expands as you explore, and strengthens as you assert yourself in the face of doubt. Each time I speak another language, I acknowledge the world beyond my own, but I never erase the parts of myself that make me unique. I carry my identity with pride even as I adapt, learn, and connect. That balance is critical. Respect often comes not from assimilation, but from the confidence to be fully yourself while engaging authentically with others. People sense that authenticity, and it is impossible to ignore. Pride also communicates values without needing to spell them out. When you are proud of who you are, the principles you live by, discipline, integrity, empathy, courage, become evident in your actions. People notice consistency between words and presence. They notice when someone speaks without hesitation, acts without apology, and navigates the world without erasing themselves to fit expectations. That alignment between identity and action is magnetic. It creates influence naturally, and respect is a natural byproduct. Even in everyday interactions, pride shapes how you are treated. I have experienced situations where simply owning my identity transformed encounters. When I enter a conversation confidently, unashamed of my background, people respond differently. They listen more carefully, engage more meaningfully, and assume competence. Pride makes it clear that you are not here to shrink, to hide, or to compromise your worth. And once that is understood, respect follows, not as something you demand, but as something you naturally earn through presence, confidence, and authenticity. I've noticed that shock is a reaction people have when their expectations are challenged, and it is a much louder sound than doubt or curiosity. It is abrupt, immediate, and often unfiltered. I first saw this clearly the day I told a room full of influential people, including a millionaire, that I spoke 9 languages. At first, there was silence, followed by a nervous laugh, a chuckle that barely concealed disbelief. I could feel the energy shift in the room, the kind of pause that signals a mental readjustment in progress. Shock is a very human response. It is the instant recognition that someone or something does not fit the story you had written in your mind. People make assumptions about ability, background, and identity constantly, and shock is the first sign that those assumptions are being confronted, sometimes violently, sometimes quietly. Shock is powerful because it stops people in their tracks. When someone is shocked, their usual filters, biases, and defenses momentarily fail. In that pause, the opportunity exists to redirect the narrative. I realized early that this pause could be used strategically. When the millionaire laughed after my declaration, I didn't argue or plead. I simply continued, speaking with confidence, clarity, and poise, demonstrating fluency in a language he could not even understand. By the time I finished, the laughter had died, replaced with wide eyes, curiosity, and the beginning of respect. Shock had created a doorway. What I did next determined whether it became a path forward or a fleeting moment. Shock is never the final reaction. It is the first signal that perceptions are about to change, if you have the awareness and courage to navigate it. I've experienced this reaction in smaller, subtler ways too. In classrooms, when I answer a question in a way that challenges the assumptions of the teacher or classmates, I see faces freeze briefly before they process what I just said. In meetings, when I make a point that reframes the discussion, people sometimes sit back, blink, and adjust their expectations. Shock is an acknowledgement that they had underestimated the possibilities, that their mental model was incomplete. It is not always comfortable, but it is necessary. It is the precursor to understanding, the first step in transforming doubt into engagement and underestimation into respect. Shock also has a way of revealing hidden biases. People rarely notice their own assumptions until something or someone disrupts the pattern. I remember a conference where I was asked to speak about my work in multiple languages. The audience was largely composed of academics and business leaders. When I began, some attendees were skeptical, and I could sense the internal calculations they were making. Could she really do this? Was she overstating her skills? And then, I switched to a language no one in the room except a few colleagues understood perfectly. Their initial shock was palpable. They hadn't anticipated competence delivered in a way they couldn't control or predict. Shock exposed the assumptions they carried, and in that exposure, respect began to form, quietly but irrevocably. I've also noticed that shock can be both a weapon and a gift. When wielded unintentionally, it can intimidate or alienate. But when understood, it can be an incredibly powerful tool for changing perceptions. People often resist evidence or logic alone. Facts and explanations are easy to dismiss. But a sudden, undeniable demonstration of skill, knowledge, or confidence leaves little room for denial. Shock bypasses rational defenses and reaches directly into perception. That is why moments of shock are often remembered long after the event itself. People forget words they heard weeks ago, but they remember how they felt when something or someone completely contradicted their expectations. Shock is memorable. What makes shock useful is not the shock itself, but what you do afterward. I have learned to lean into it. When people are shocked, I maintain composure, articulate my point, and provide evidence through demonstration rather than argument. This approach transforms their initial reaction from disbelief to reflection. Shock is like a spark. It ignites attention. What follows that spark determines whether perceptions solidify or evolve. I have found that responding thoughtfully and confidently after that moment not only changes minds, but begins to reshape long-held narratives about ability, identity, and potential. Shock is also a leveling force. When someone laughs at a bold statement or scoffs at unexpected skill, shock makes them pause. It reminds them that the world is bigger and more complex than their assumptions. In that pause, hierarchies that seemed unshakable, reputations that seemed fixed, and perceptions that seemed rigid all begin to shift. Shock challenges complacency. It forces people to reassess, to pay attention, and to acknowledge realities they may have been blind to. Even outside professional or public settings, shock plays a transformative role. In casual interactions, when someone expresses surprise at what you know, what you can do, or the way you carry yourself, it triggers reflection. They reconsider their expectations, their judgments, and their mental shortcuts. Shock is often fleeting, but its impact can be lasting if you respond to it with presence, confidence, and authenticity. It is the first crack in the wall of assumptions, the starting point for changing minds, and a reminder that perception is fluid, not fixed.